Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Kryptonite Show. And we've got a great topic today, of course. We'll be talking about President Trump. He shocks the cartels at the southern border. And of course, we've got the Secretary of Defense there coming up, Peter Hegseth, sorry. And that's huge, right? Along with the Vice President, it is a pretty big deal, right? So we're going to get into all that and more during this live stream. So I hope you guys enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, hit the bell. Join our Discord. Links are in the video description. And without further ado, we're going to get into the mix there. So let's go. So we've got some cool stuff happening in the southern border. After President Trump's speech at Congress yesterday, he followed up very quickly with sending some of the heavyweights in his cabinet, including the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense. It is pretty impressive. So he's signaling that he wants the big budget. Something like $175 billion for border security, $150 billion for Pentagon, a budget expansion as well. So it's sort of big money. And so that's going to go through with one big bill, right? So he's trying to get it all done, one big bill. And of course, he's still, the Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. So if they're going to do it, it's going to be done now. So that's very exciting to see that. So some big money. Estimates are that if he wants to get rid of, all the illegal aliens in the United States over the Biden period, maybe somewhere upwards of 10 to 13 million people, that could cost about 88 billion a year, based on some estimates. Of course, as they get better and better at it, and they unite all the different departments of the United States, that would probably get cheaper and cheaper as they move forward. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see how that unfolds over the next 4 years as well. Now, remember, they've all broken the law, right? Illegally entering the United States. But of course, he's focused on the worst of the worst so far. And of course, has made something like 35 to 40,000 arrests, somewhere in that ballpark so far, or apprehensions. And of course, border crossings are down over the border, down by about 98%, 99%, or something like that. So there's only very low amounts coming through. I think last week there was only about 8,000 altogether. So some pretty big successes there already, and now followed up with having the Vice President and the Secretary of Defense and others go down to the border. Pretty impressive. So we're going to check out some of the videos that are out there at the moment. Of course, with the Vice President going down to the southern border. And we can see someone here with the Vice President there, meeting with the Air Force, I guess, and military, and many other people there at the airport going down to the southern border. So pretty impressive stuff. And these guys are serious. The Trump administration is serious about the border and immigration, as well as getting that budget through. $175 billion. So far, it got approved in February with the initial resolution, as I understand it. They're trying to get it through the official Congress budget. So it's going to be interesting to see that play out. Got to feel pretty good about it. And of course, a big signal after yesterday's speech is that he sent the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, and others down there. So it is a big deal. So that is pretty awesome. And meanwhile, we've got Tom Homan, of course, out and about collecting up all these illegals, and particularly criminals that are in the United States, and getting them off the streets, getting them out of America, and of course punishing them if they should be punished. So it is hitting pretty good. And of course, these guys are pretty serious about all these things. As you can see, the Vice President of the United States is even involved in spearheading this. So pretty impressive stuff here. As Vice President J.D. Vance goes to the southern border. And this is a video that posted earlier today. So pretty important there. He's also obviously taking Lent there as well on his way, on his trip to probably safeguard them, I would say. So pretty important stuff happening there. Now, obviously, in the United States, they've got serious issues with crime from illegal immigration, and they're trying to deal with it, right? And the people are pretty happy about it in the United States. We see that Trump and J.D. Vance both having record favorability. And of course, the speech yesterday was something like 78% favorability for Trump's speech in Congress. So it's pretty important there. And some of the numbers are pretty big, obviously, for border control, border security, $175 billion. That is what's going to go through, plus 150 billion for Pentagon. Pretty big money. And I imagine once these guys get their departments working, set up properly and working pretty seamlessly, the numbers are going to start to really climb. So, let's see where they end up with how many people they can get out over 4 years. So it's going to be pretty crazy to see that. So pretty amazing. Now, we saw that they already had pretty early successes when Trump got into power on the 20th of January. And by the 3rd of February, had already arrested about 6,000 illegal immigrants through the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS. And that was deported and removed to 121 countries. Just shows you how many people are trying to get into the United States. Just so many countries trying to get in. And of course, some of those people include, potentially terrorist cells, cartels and gangs, and many others. So pretty bad stuff there. And at the one month mark after the 20th of January, but about the late February, after about 1 month, they had pretty much arrested over about 20,000 illegal immigrants there in Trump's first month. So it was a pretty good start, and a lot of those were the worst of the worst too. So which is pretty good. So they really started to climb the numbers. So it's pretty exciting to see where all this is going to head, and they're really only going to start ramping it all up, right? So we probably had about 35,000 arrests so far in the mix there for Trump. So started off pretty well. That leads us on into Trump. Once the vice president and that got to the border, they ended up going to Texas and going through Eagle Pass on a helicopter, looking at the border in person. So we'll have a look at that as well. You can see a helicopter there just coming back from that tour over the border at Eagles Pass there with the Vice President and the Secretary of Defense and Homeland Security Gabbard as well and the helicopters. So pretty impressive stuff. This is the United States. I mean, it's the most powerful military in the world, and you've got all the big guns there. It's pretty crazy going down to the border there. So Trump is extremely serious about this. And it's pretty amazing to see, right? Pretty amazing to see that. And you can see the helicopters coming in right now, back from that tour of the border. So very serious stuff happening in the United States. Really, really cool. I guess some of those are transport buses that they use to transport people. Pretty neat. This stuff we don't generally see down in New Zealand here. This sort of activity. Obviously, the United States is so powerful. It is pretty crazy to see. A couple of helicopters went through the southern border there, Eagles Pass to Texas, and now they've come back from that tour. Pretty neat. So that's some of the stuff that's going on there, and obviously Trump there really, saying, "Hey, look, if you're in Congress, get this stuff through. We're serious about border security. We've got our leadership team, the cabinet down there, really going to try and deal with this, and that's how serious we are." Now they've got them down pretty low, like 98% or something, but they really want to get it that close to zero. So once Tom Homan gets that money, they'll be able to do that. And of course, they're also going to take it on the front foot, right, to get to the cartels, right? And they want Mexico to join them on that. So that's going to be huge, they've obviously Trump's designated the cartels as terrorist organizations. And I think it's about time. I think if it wasn't done now, I think that all hell would break loose in the decades ahead in terms of the cartels, because once they blackmail and do all sorts of stuff, politicians and everyone else, you pretty much lost your country, right? So I think that's going to be a big deal. And we already see 29 different cartel leaders and gang members already handed over by the Mexican government under pressure from Trump with tariffs and other things. So pretty incredible. Obviously, designated as a terrorist organization means that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, can send special forces, and America has some of the very best, of course. So it's going to be pretty crazy to see that, and of course also advanced drone technology. They already got the eyes in the sky already, right? So there you can see at the moment coming in there is the Vice President of the United States, probably with the Secretary of Defense there as well. that there's after they've done their tour of the border in Eagles Pass in Texas. And you can see the Vice President of the United States coming out there. You got obviously Secret Service coming out there as well, military. I mean, this helicopter is pretty chock full of dignitaries and special forces, basically. In terms of some of these guys, pretty crazy. Now, I don't think there's anyone Delta Force there, maybe, but definitely Secret Service and military there, taking them to see the southern border. So very, very sick. Just the next day after Trump does a speech, and this is how serious Trump is about it. It's very impressive. This is real leadership. People see this leadership as a big deal. We see that countries around the world now, Trump's mentioned it. He's got like 20, 30 leaders of the world all trying to contact him, all trying to get on board because they all want to get a seat at the table, right? And of course, at the moment, Trump's created a state of confusion, which is where typically you make the best deals, right? You create a state of confusion, you can then reorganize the world order. And of course, we want it to be freedom and security, and that's what he's going to give us, right? And prosperity eventually. Now, there's always a bit of a shake-up at the beginning, but it's going to be so much beneficial in the future, right? So short-term pain for big gain is the way we see it. Now, we know that a lot of the globalists and a lot of the social progressives and Marxists are all up in arms and are all running around almost like headless chickens, some of them trying to collude against Trump, of course, but really getting pushed back there. We see, President Trudeau, it's almost president, isn't it? Prime Minister Trudeau there, who's actually, hopefully we're going to have elections there within the next 30 days or so, but he's basically running Canada as a dictatorship at the moment. So it's going to be interesting to see where all that heads, and he's trying to be, big boys pants and push back. We also see some of the state premiers in Canada also, putting up a bit of a fight. But I think there's going to be a lot of negotiations eventually. It will get wound down, and Trump will have reordered the economics and the political sphere there as well. So that there is the vice president getting out with the defense secretary as well, Peter Hegseth there. And you got the Secret Service coming up as well. You can see that the helicopter's finally wound down. So to see them progressing there with that. Maybe some more helicopters are coming in there. You can see the vice president still sitting in helicopters waiting for the fins to stop flying around. Just chilling out there in the helicopter there, just pushing through that. They're just getting out now, the vice president. And I think, the defense secretary just getting out as well on the back left there as well, Peter Hegseth. So pretty cool. So that's what they did. They flew down the southern border straight after President Trump's speech, and then making a big signal there that they want to deal hardcore with security and safety and immigration. And then, of course, they ended up doing a tour of the southern border. So pretty impressive stuff. Now we're going to check out. I'm going to check out after they did that tour, or around that time, they also did a big meeting, press release. They had a big meeting, and then they had a big press moment with the press to answer questions, which was pretty cool. So we're going to check out some of that. I'm probably going to stop it on the way and talk about different things that they bring up. So.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody.
If you need the channel, subscribe
appreciate you
and smash
being
that
here.
like button as well.
It's great to be here. It's great to talk to some of the incredible people that we have, both at the local level, the Texas state level, and also, of course, our federal border patrol, who are doing so many good things to keep us safe. And I have some bad news and some good news. And the bad news is that because of what Joe Biden did at the southern border for 4 years, we had record increases in migrant crime, in fentanyl deaths, and in just floods and floods of people who shouldn't be in our country who came into the United States of America. We also have a number of ways in which the cartels became more advanced, better war fighters, because Joe Biden opened up the American southern border and allowed the cartels to turn it into their playground. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is, as President Trump said last night at the State of the Union, it turns out we didn't need new laws. We didn't need fancy legislation. We just needed a new president of the United States, and thank God that's exactly what we have. And I will say that the most heartening message that I take away from my visit here at the Texas border is the number of Border Patrol agents who have come up to me and said thank you, or said because of this, we've cut the number of border crossings from 1,500 a day to 30 a day. Or the people who have come up and said we've seen a reduction, an 85% of the number of people who are dying at the American southern border. And every single day that we continue to keep this border safe, that means less migrant crime, that means less fentanyl coming into our communities, that means more safety and security for the people of the United States of America. And of course, we know the border problem, the border crisis under Biden's administration was a national crisis, but it acutely affected the communities right here. And I've already heard heartbreaking stories of people who are still picking up the pieces, local mayors who are still dealing with the budgetary consequences of what the Joe Biden administration allowed to happen at the American southern border. And that, too, is something that President Trump is going to help address, help fix, and help solve. Now, I wanted to bring Secretary.
So some really important things there, obviously, about the border, getting it down, from 1,500 captures to maybe 30 or 40 a day. So they really are making incredible progress there. Particularly shout out to Tom Homan, who's working on that as the borders are. But this is also kicking costs down the road. It's better to spend costs on keeping all the people out, because they're just going to have costs kicked down the road into lots of fraud and Social Security and other things that they try to get and things as well. And of course, crime and all the other issues that are really bad. And of course, they're all going over illegally, right? There is a legal way to get into the United States. I would think from memory, there's about 1 million or so people get through the United States illegally, and they have to line up for that, right? They have to line up for that. So that is where the people should be getting into. I mean, I know that in my country, that's definitely the case. And then, of course, then you can deal with the issue of legal immigration by itself. Of course, we have a lot of governments that don't campaign on immigration, but they just run through policies which are typically run through the United Nations, right? They're running basically UN policies of replacement and things like that. But the United States, they still have a lot of control if they want to have it over the immigration.
And Director Gabbard at DNI down here, because one, I obviously enjoy their company, and it's good to have them down here with me looking around today. But unfortunately, we know that because of what's happened, the border crisis has become a matter of national intelligence, and it's also become something that requires the Department of Defense to engage with. I was talking with Paul Perez earlier. The drone technology that the cartels are using requires, unfortunately, a military response and military support. So it was important for Secretary Hegseth to see what's going on, because we know that the millions and millions of people who were let in over the last 4 years, many of them are connected to foreign terrorists. It's important for our leader of national intelligence to get a sense of what's here on the ground. So before we take questions from the press, and all of us are willing to take questions, I want to give Secretary Hegseth and then Director Gabbard an opportunity to say a few words themselves. Mr. Secretary.
Well, Mr. Vice President, thank you very much for inviting us. It's great to be here with you, with the director, with our fellow friends in civilian clothes and in other shades of green. This is a demonstration of a true partnership on the southern border. As President Trump has made clear on the campaign trail and from day one and last night, border security is national security. And from the Defense Department, we've watched for a couple of decades other people's borders being secured while ours was open for an invasion of drugs and of violence and of chaos for American communities. That stops under President Trump. And the Defense Department has assets that we can bring to bear, not just troops, not just surveillance, not just equipment, but actual planning and capabilities that enhance what Border Patrol is already doing, which is why it's been incredible to hear from our partners about what we've been able to allow them to do, facilitate them, and we've seen it in the numbers. 98% drop in crossings on the southern border. We're not yet at 100% operational control, but we are on our way, because that is the mandate that the president has given us. So more resources are coming to this border. We are dedicated to securing it. That's the reason for our trip and our partnership. And I want to thank all the men and women who've been doing it recently in uniform, who have been doing it a long time right here, have dedicated their lives to securing the American people. And at the Defense Department, we are committed to continuing to being a big part of it. So, Mr. Vice President, thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that's pretty important there. You got the Defense Department now fully involved and can command and control over the southern border to get that down to zero. They currently got it down 98%, which is pretty incredible with only 5 weeks. And they want to get that to pretty much down to zero, lock it right down. So that's really interesting that he said all these other capabilities, but then he talked about pretty much planning, and that's basically command and control. So that is like basically a battlefield, and that's really, really interesting. So they've really gone to the nth degree. Now, before that, of course, J.D. Vance, the vice president, was talking about the advanced drones that the cartels have got access to. Well, those indicates that the military is also going to probably use advanced drones, which are obviously way more advanced, but also special forces and other armed forces to bear, including Delta Force and things like that, to address the cartels and then now they've been designated as terrorists, and of course getting rid of those is going to be a pretty big deal, right? And that's basically a whole battlefront. So now you've got this command and control kind of idea mixed in with these other departments like Homeland Security. It is pretty exciting to see where this heads. And of course, don't forget that all these cartels, there's some of the most wicked cartels in the world. And of course, they basically, a lot of people that come through, they either they enslave basically, and that includes women and children. You have to pay a certain amount of money, and you get to the other side, and then you basically enslave you and work in some underground sweatshop or something, or sex trade and things like that. There's lots of terrible things, and that just goes hidden in the United States where people don't care, right? And all this bad things happening to a lot of people. Also, 1 in 3 women get sexually raped or affected going through the border too. So there's lots of that sort of crime, and of course other terrible things that happen as well. And obviously all the drugs comes through, and of course all the high-end murders come through, some terrible stuff. So there's so many things. And then of course when they get into the suburbs, they cause crime, they have different values, all sorts of stuff. So it really is pretty important. And now Trump's got basically a full military setup being set up. So it's in progress, but it's happening pretty fast, as you guys can see. Pretty exciting there.
Thank you. Great. Now, Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for your leadership in bringing the country's attention to what has been happening here at the border and the significant change that has already occurred under the short time that President Trump has been in office. Really, what you're seeing here today and what you'll continue to see is a unified effort across President Trump's national security team, the Department of Homeland Security, towards our mission, which is to ensure a safe, free, and prosperous society for Americans. As Director of National Intelligence, there are a number of areas where we are focused. The President talked about in his speech, over 21 million people have come across our borders illegally under Joe Biden's administration. There are many of them that we don't know who they are. They have not been vetted. We don't know where they are. I'll give you one quick example of one of the problems that we are getting after. From Central Asia, there were over 4,000 people who came across our borders using an ISIS-affiliated network. Our National Counterterrorism Center went through and identified those individuals. There were hundreds of them who were either known terrorists or associated with known terrorists. That information was provided to the Biden administration. You may remember in some of the news, a little over 100 of those people were arrested in 2024. Of those who were arrested, only 8 were either deported or remained in custody. Only 8. The rest of them were released back into our country. Where are they? What are they doing? What may they be plotting? This is just the beginning. There are many, many areas that we need to stay very focused on, working with Department of Homeland Security, working with the FBI to ensure that we're keeping the American people safe. Our Counterterrorism Center is working on making sure that we have that single source for vetting so that we can figure out who is actually in our country and identify those who pose a threat and get them removed. The President's designation of the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations falls directly into this, especially as we're seeing some of the tactics that these cartels are using reflect some of the tactics that we've seen used by Islamist terrorists in countries that many of us have served in overseas. Our mission is very clear. Our objective is to keep the American people safe. I'm grateful to be a part of this team that President Trump has assembled to accomplish that mission. Thank you.
Now, that's pretty interesting. So not only we got the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, FBI, Justice Department, we also got the Central Intelligence. So it's all coming together. Probably reasonable to expect that within 3 months of Trump's presidency, we could have a pretty efficient, effective setup with command and control intelligence, and of course boots on the ground in the air, and of course also getting justice done through the Justice Department. So really it's going to be exciting where this goes. Obviously getting the Congress budget through 175 billion plus 150 billion for the Pentagon is going to be very important to make all this happen as well. But the more efficient they get, the more effective they get, the quicker, the cheaper they can get the job done. So they'll just improve massively there. Pretty huge. So yeah, the other thing is terrorists, right? How many of the people come over through have been terrorists, whether they're working for the Chinese Communist Party, whether they're working for Iran, whether they're working for one of the Islamic jihads, like ISIS. How many of those people got through? They've obviously had moments where they've had people wearing the same outfits, like coming from China wearing the same outfits because there's different routes through there. And the absurdity of all this is that the Biden administration was actually flying people in through the border, over the border as well as NGOs were funneling big money and big busing and water supply, just everything, having little stops along the routes through South America where people would come in, whether they come in from South America or landed in South America from other countries like China and places, and India, Pakistan. I mean, it was all coming through that southern border. It was pretty crazy. Everybody was coming. Like I say, in the first 5 weeks, they've sent home illegal immigrants to something like 121 countries. It is just absurd and obscene. And of course, the crime has gone through the roof in the United States cities. So it's a very good move here. Just common sense too. But the problem is, in the West, we have so many bad leaders. Some of them actually evil leaders. Some of them just bad, and of course have caused destruction throughout the whole West. And much of it is intentional. So it's and they clip the ticket on the way, which is the narcissistic side of it, right? They earn a big income while they're doing it. All right, so we're going to continue on here with the vice president coming back, and he's just going to thank a few people and then do some pretty interesting Q&As here as well.
So before I take questions, let me just say two final things. First of all, the reason why we've seen, as Pete said, a 98% reduction of border crossings, the reason why this particular site has gone from over 1,500 crossings per day to 30 crossings per day is because President Trump has empowered and, in fact, demanded that his whole government take the task of border control seriously. And that's exactly what we're doing. And of course, and this leads to my final point before we take questions, it is impossible to do without the men and women on the ground who are actually doing the hard work. They just want to be empowered to do their jobs. President Trump has made that possible. So from the bottom of my heart, and for a grateful nation, to every person I've met here today, thank you for working hard on the American people's business. It's been an honor to be with you. It's been an honor to see what you do, and we're going to keep on supporting you over the next 4 years. Congressman Gonzalez, thank you for being here, and thank you for your leadership. And now we'll take.
Now, this is a big thing, under Biden and all that, the border control and everybody, they were completely upset with what was going on. Instead of keeping people out of the country, they had to help people get in the country. And so they were very upset. And therefore, you got some of the head of the border control supporting Trump, saying, hey, we want Trump. We want to do our jobs, and we want to protect our country. And you're making us, work for the invaders, as it were. So that's pretty bad. The other thing, of course, is that the Trump administration thanks people all the time. They just constantly thank people for the boots on the ground. They thank the police. They thank the fire people. They just do everything just the right way. It's just so good, and I think that's what's showing up in the polls. And I suspect that they're only going to increase their approval, generally speaking, as we move forward. So that's going to be pretty impressive. Now, before we get into Q&A, we've got a few people in the chat there, so let's say hello. A couple of people. We've got Brennan in the house there. Howdy, super. Good to see you, Brennan. And Brennan says, what's the Macron? So President Macron going back? Yeah, so I posted a video earlier today from President Macron talking about militarizing not only France, but also getting other countries in Europe to militarize, using Putin and Russia as the boogeyman, and saying that they need Europe defense. So they're just scaremongering the people. Like I said, they also post certain numbers that are their own projections of military expansion. But of course, Russia's actually having, even though they are producing a lot of weapons compared to Europe, of course, because they're militarized, they're in a war economy. That war economy always runs down, right? Because you haven't got men on the fields harvesting wheat, for example. You've got them on the front line, and many of them getting killed or injured. So you can only do that for so long, and that's why one of the reasons that Putin, after 3 years of war there, is wanting to get peace there as well. So Putin's already tried to get peace at least twice through the Americans and the Europeans, and both times were denied. The first time was a response to previous stuff. So in December 2021, January 2022, Foreign Minister Lavrov and Putin were both petitioning the US, hey, what are you doing? And they were talking to the Foreign Minister Blinken at the time. And the Americans were just, under the Biden administration, were just like, we don't want to hear from you. You're our enemy. We're going to fund the war. We're going to, whatever corruption they had going on, they weren't interested. And so the Russians ended up invading Ukraine in February of 2022, right? So there's a lot of backstory there, Now, it's the Russians themselves, Putin and that, they don't necessarily have to be good people to agree what they're doing, because they've done a lot of bad things, but they also have been under a lot of pressure to defend their line, right? They wanted to keep Ukraine neutral, and the NATO and the US under Biden were pushing that forward, right? And it's the same as what they did under Obama, right? And when Obama was in there back in 2014, right, which is when Russia invaded the Donbass and got their ports and stuff on the Black Sea. So just that's the attitude of the Democrats, and of course they like to use Putin as the big enemy. But at the moment, of course, they've been smashed. Really, they've lost a lot of men, maybe 800,000 or a million men on the Russian side, maybe 700,000 on the Ukrainian side, and it's a huge hit, right? A lot of young men just gone, and it's just a brutal, unwinnable war too. It's an unwinnable war. If anyone's going to win, it would be Russia, and they've certainly been taking ground recently. So it is a big issue there. Macron, of course, talking about spending huge amount of money to militarize, and also talking about some crazy stuff. This is even crazier, talking about putting a nuclear shield, because obviously France is a big nuclear power, putting a nuclear shield expanded all over Europe, which is pretty crazy. Remember, Ukraine is not in the EU yet. It's a pre-stage, and it's also not in NATO. So it is pretty crazy talk there. Just like talking about putting troops in the Ukraine. That's just silly too. Putin and Lavrov have already said we're not going to tolerate that. So that's not going to be part of any peace deal either. And that's why Trump's really gone for this economic deal around rare earths. Now, there's no provable rare earths in Ukraine. There's provable minerals like lithium. They've been proven up by American companies, but rare earths is a bit of a question mark there. So there's a lot of work has to be done around that. And of course, getting people like BlackRock. So Macron there, just scaring his people, and just to justify their expansion of the military. Hey, look, and who they're likely to turn the military against? Russia? No, they're more likely to turn it against their own people, because that's what they're doing around everything: propaganda, progressivism, all that sort of stuff, and authoritarianism. They're taking away freedoms, right? That's why Vice President Vance in the picture there was speaking to them about the fact that you're taking away freedoms, and they didn't like that, did they? Because that's exactly what they were doing. And now they're getting into massive propaganda there with a state address there from Macron in the last 24 hours. Well, that's crazy from Macron, yeah. But typical behaviour. We saw a softer approach with the same idea from Prime Minister Starmer, right? Who's already pressing his own people, taking away rights, and of course, as a socialist Marxist authoritarian, right? So, and he's just helping the UK to decline, and he's also talking about taking money from the civilians and spending it more on military to so-called counter Putin. But of course, all their economies are struggling, and so there's not a lot of money around, and they need the US, right? They need the US. So they're just playing a bit of silly games, trying to look like they're strong and tough. And of course, you saw the head of the European Union, trying to talk about 800 billion pounds to spend over the next couple of years on militarizing as well. So you got this push from the globalists that are running these countries to try and build a European army and make Russia the boogeyman. But like I say, Russia, they really only want to do limited war. Now, obviously, Poland has an army of about 110,000 soldiers and modern weapons. They've already said, no, we're not joining you in this because we've got to defend our own border. And of course, they're sitting next to 3 former USSR states, which also want to be defended. And so that's where that's at the moment. And obviously, you've got Ukraine just below them, which obviously in war at the moment have been for the last 3 years. So that's pretty bad too. It's also seen Spain say, nah, we're not going into the coalition of the willing there from Prime Minister Starmer. And therefore, with the same with Macron, right? They're all part of the same little group there. So, yeah, it's pretty crazy. We see Italy say, nah, we're not in it either. we're trying to follow Trump and Trump world with Melania there in Italy. And, of course, Germany can't really do much at the moment because they've just had an election. They're still trying to form a government. They're trying to form a government with the government that just left, that got voted out. And this is how bad democracy is running in Europe at the moment. And, of course, there's lots of other bad things happening in Portugal with the EU. So the EU is full of unelected bureaucrats working for the globalists, and they are undermining democracy and trying to get permanent power, right? So for people like Macron and others. So it's a pretty big mess over there. They indoctrinate enough people there and they can make them fall for it. But we've certainly seen a shift away from their ideology as people, wake up a little bit and see things that, hey, wait, I've been oppressed, I've been indoctrinated. It's time for me to be a bit free. So we're getting a little bit of stuff there. So Brennan says he acted so buddy with Trump the other day with the two-faced person. Yeah. Hey, look, Trump knows that. Trump likes his accents. He likes the European accents. He likes the French accent. He likes the British accent. He likes it because it's fun. It's sophisticated, and he likes that. This is statesmanship, right? But he knows what these guys are like. He's not ignorant to that. And yeah, Macron is definitely two-faced. He does a lot of the holding, hugging, and the kissing, and all the rest of it. It's they're not fault. And you saw recently, even after the Prime Minister of the UK, they shut down the. Tried to do this coalition of the willing and said, I've been talking to Trump. Trump was, kind of in agreement. Let's go. But then the next day you have Trump, pulling the military aid to Ukraine. So Trump's the one that calls the shots. So that's kind of where we're headed. Now there's obviously threats of, talk about Trump pulling out of NATO altogether. And of course, NATO really is the United States, if you think about it. It's going to be pretty interesting to see where that heads. And so that's part of the dynamic about this 800 billion euros that the Europeans are thinking about trying to militarize their countries. But they've got a lot of countries in Europe that don't want to be part of it and certainly don't want to lose their troops, because especially Poland. We'll see where that goes. And of course, Hungary is not interested in that, right? So Hungary is very much a Trump supporting country, just like Italy. And of course, we may see in the future in France whether France can actually be saved, because France is split into 3 different main groups. So it's very difficult. You got the sort of the liberal globalists, and then you got the social Marxists, and then you got the right. And so we'll see how that goes in the future. So that's kind of things that are happening over there. And man, I'd hate to be over there, to be honest. I mean, there's some great people and great countries and great beautiful things, but there's also bad decline, right? And bad violence and jihadis and all that sort of stuff. Pretty miserable. If you pickpocketers, imagine going through a train in a town and you got pickpocketers, you got people trying to scam you. These people are coming from other countries and they want a better life, and they just come to the new country and then they start scamming you. And it's like, this is where the values aren't the same, right? Pretty crazy stuff. Now, obviously, Trump's trying to clean that up on the border, trying to get people with the same values coming in. And of course, I talked about the gold card there as a way of getting high valued people into the United States. We've got Mayflower in the house. Keep up the great work, Superman. You are a true hardworking member of the RH ecosystem. It's not easy when you do what you do night after night. You have my thumb up all the time. God bless, strength and honor. Hey, thanks for that. Appreciate that. And likewise, thank you. All right, so let's get into the Q&A from this section as we continue on with the Trump there, shocking the cartels. This is a fully military operation now with the Department of Defense in there. Pretty awesome.
Some questions from reporters. Sir.
So, as you guys have been exemplifying for today, that border crossings are down. A lot of attention has been turned to the interior, since obviously there's been a lot of illegal immigrants. What is, in your opinion, the biggest obstacle to actually carrying out President Trump's mass deportations? Even though, yes, like apprehensions and arrests and deportations have gone up in his first month, but a lot of people are expecting a bigger capacity for deportation. So what's
So let me say a few things about that. So first of all, Rome wasn't built in a day, and we have seen pretty significant increases in deportations and apprehensions and arrests. But we have to remember that President Biden gutted the entire immigration enforcement regime of this country. We are trying to rebuild so that we actually empower people to enforce the immigration laws of the American people. It is common sense.
That's another important part there, is that, Biden, not only was he letting everybody come in, he was flying them in, helping the NGOs and all that, but he was also, gutting the troops and the enforcement officers that were doing it as well. Just a complete traitorship. This is the President of the United States betraying his own country. It's unbelievable.
It's what the American people want us to do. There are a couple of other things that we're working on, and I don't want to get ahead of any public announcements, but one of the ways that we wanted to make sure that we're enforcing our border is that we make it easier for people who are here illegally to go back home of their own accord. We don't want to have to go around and arrest every person, but we will enforce the American people's immigration laws. If you're here illegally, the message from our administration is you should go back home, and if you want to come to the United States, apply through the proper channels. That's an important thing that we're doing. And the final thing is this costs money. One of the most important parts of the president's reconciliation priorities is, of course, tax reform on the one hand, and on the other hand, making sure that we get proper resources so that we can pay for the flights, and we can pay for the detention centers, and we can pay for all the components necessary to ensure that we're re-migrating illegal immigrants back to their country of origin. I guarantee it is a part of the president's priorities. We'll keep on working on it. We've made a lot of progress, but we're going to keep on working on it over the remainder of the president's term. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Vice President, I want to ask you about border wall and tariffs. But first on the border wall, how do you and the president...
Could you say your outlet, by the way, when you guys ask questions?
Yeah, Reagan Reese, Daily Caller.
Thank you.
How do you and the president define success this term with the border wall, and how much of the southern border wall needs to be walled off before Trump leaves office?
Well, look, I think the president's hope is that by the end of the term, we build the entire border wall. And of course, that's the physical structure of the border wall itself. But we even heard today, there are so many good technological tools, so many great artificial intelligence enabled technologies that allow us, for example, a camera, not a person, but a camera picks up somebody 2 miles away who's about to come across the southern border. Maybe it's livestock, right? Maybe it's a critter in the desert. Maybe it's a human being with a weapon on their back. We're using artificial intelligence to make us better at the job of border enforcement, but we've got to make sure that technology is deployed across the entire American southern border. We're going to do it as much as we can, as broadly as we can, because that's how we're going to protect the American people's security. Yeah, go ahead.
Last time they were paused because they deployed 10,000 troops to the border. What can they do this time to make the tariffs go away?
Well, what the president has said is we need a sustained commitment from the government of Mexico to take the job of border security seriously. Fentanyl is the single largest cause of death among young Americans, and we know that a substantial portion of it is, the precursors are made in China. They come to Mexico, they're manufactured in Mexico and brought across the border by the Mexican drug cartels. We want to see fewer Americans dying of these terrible fentanyl overdoses, when we're going to apply as much leverage as possible to the Mexican government as possible. In some ways, look, the president obviously cares deeply about the American people. He serves the American people first. I actually think he's doing a huge favor to the people of Mexico, because if they don't get control of these cartels, the people of Mexico are going to wake up in a narco state where the cartels have more power than their own government. President Trump is trying to help. The Mexican government needs to take this issue of immigration enforcement seriously.
All right, so that was under Biden. That's where the United States was heading as well, is that the United States was going to, well on its way to becoming a narcotic state, is also So America's really been staved by Trump coming in now, and it really would have been past the point of no return after another 4 years of that. So that's really important. The first thing, of course, is they've got to tighten the border up, and they're doing that. That's the first one. And the second one is that they got to deal with all the cities. They're trying to arrest people. So Tom Homan there is trying to, get rid of all these bad gangsters and everyone else, and shut down things domestically. But also, trying to get the Justice Department and other people going after some of the people that have been set up and who might be politicians, police or anyone else that's been compromised by the cartels. So there's all that stuff to be cleaned up as well, because you've got to break the networks up, right? You got to break the networks up there, and we're already seeing a lot of Democrats, mayors, and people that's trying to get around ICE and all this other stuff. But of course, federal law does trump state law for most of the part. So it's going to be interesting to see that. And then thirdly, the United States is definitely going to take it on the front foot, right? They're going to go and try and clean up, get the Mexico to agree. We want to take out your cartels. It's going to make Mexico a much better place to live if you haven't got cartels threatening you. Maybe you got a shop in Mexico and you have to pay money to the cartel just to operate the shop. Then if you can get rid of the cartel, then there's no one to come around and collect the fee for running your shop, right? So you're going to be better off, and you're not going to feel threatened, and so forth. And remember, when they threaten you in the Mexico and the cartels and other Latin American countries, they do severely terrible, horrifying things out of a horror movie to people. So it really is pretty cool on that. So they're doing that. And meanwhile, I guess number 4 is they're working on using tariffs as part of that to get foreign governments to start coming to the party and help deal with that upstream, as you would call it, into the United States. So it is a pretty comprehensive approach that Trump is doing, and they're doing it with the leadership team at the front line. I mean, this is really incredible stuff, and an example to all countries around the world, honestly. And it's hopefully it will have some effect on our countries within the next 12 months. It'll be very exciting.
In the back, yeah.
Mr. Vice President, Ali Bradley, News Nation. So since the designation of the cartels as terrorists, does that give the United States the green light to go into Mexico and to strike them there? I mean, right now, obviously, they've struck in the Houthis in Yemen. So why not, when we've seen cross-border violence, go after them in Mexico? And then my second question is about a designation. I'll follow up on these.
Go ahead and ask the second question.
Why isn't the Juarez/La Línea cartel designated when it's in one of the most deadliest places on the planet? Juarez has been designated as one of the deadliest cities. It's right across from El Paso. We've talked to community leaders. They say, we know Juarez cartel's operating in the U.S., and so are their affiliates. We don't even want to talk about it out loud, though, because then we'll put a target on our back. They're scared. Border Patrol even thought they were designated, but they're not. The State Department didn't tell me why.
So on that, we're looking at additional organizations. Obviously, this is the determination of whether to determine a particular organization, a terrorist organization, is something that we consult with our leaders of the Department of Defense. We also consult with our friends in other governments. We maintain the optionality to designate further organizations, terrorist organizations, if we feel that we need to in order to protect the American people. And I think President Trump has made it very clear he's not going to be shy about designating some of these cartel organizations as terrorists if he thinks he has to protect the American people. Your first question was about
American forces to strike.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, look, I'm not going to make any announcements about any invasions of Mexico here today. The president has a megaphone, and of course, he'll speak to these issues as he feels necessary. But what designating cartel organizations allows us to do is deploy the full resources of the United States military to engage in serious border enforcement. Of course, the president is going to make the determination about how we deploy those forces. But our hope is that Mexico takes this job seriously. We don't want to have negative relationships with the Mexican government. We want the Mexican government to help itself, but also in the process to help the American people by taking these organizations seriously. It's going to destabilize the entire country of Mexico, the entire government, if they don't take it more seriously. We're hopeful that they will. And if they don't, then of course, we'll figure out what to do from there.
I was going to add to that that if they do stuff like that, they'll have to be very coordinated, and they have to have a good map of where the enemy so-called is, right? So, they're not going to be. It's going to be well organized. So, yeah, seeing Pete Hegseth there with the command and control, it's going to be a pretty big deal.
You just mentioned something about invasion of Mexico. Is there any talk or any thoughts about actually U.S. military forces going into Mexico?
No. Next question.
On tariffs, are any other industries other than automotive reaching out to you guys to carve out special deals? And did the automotive industry know this was coming before today?
Well, a number of industries have reached out to us to ask us for exceptions to the tariffs, but I think the president's been very clear here that he wants the tariffs to apply broadly. He doesn't want to have 500 different industries getting 500 different carve-outs, and the way to avoid application of the tariffs is to have your factory and have your facility in the United States of America. That is the way. Invest in America. That is how you will avoid being penalized by these tariffs.
Vice President, KSAT 12, John Paul Barajas. You've been talking about the improvements that your administration has done here with the crossings. Can you talk about the decline prior to President Trump taking office under the Biden administration?
Well, I think like so many Americans, apparently members of the Mexican drug cartel figured out in November and December after the election that Joe Biden was asleep at the wheel and they had to be dealing with the then president-elect and now president. If you look at what drove the declines before the inauguration, people will tell you they knew that Donald Trump was coming back into office. They knew he was going to take border enforcement seriously. And so they were already getting ahead of actually cutting down those illegal crossing numbers. We saw that from the Mexican government, of course, because we were threatening some economic sanctions against them. But we also saw it from the cartels themselves. And even today, because, of course, it doesn't, it takes a little time to get from the deepest parts of Central America to the American southern border. What we often find is that there are massive numbers of illegal immigrants who have already started to make the trek and have decided, you know what, because Donald Trump's president, we're going to go back home. We heard today about a Honduran group of migrants who decided they're just going to go back home because they recognize that under Donald Trump's leadership, we take border enforcement seriously. Thank you all. Take care.
All right, so that there was from the Vice President at the border with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Intelligence there, Central Intelligence, Gabbard. So pretty, the heavyweights came the day after the Congress speech from Trump. So this is some pretty serious stuff there. And as I understand, they're after about $175 billion in the budget and $150 billion for the Pentagon as well. So real expansion there. And like I said, as they get organized, but it might take them a couple of months to get fully organized with the command and control. It will be pretty impressive what they'll be able to achieve, get their bang for their buck. So the cost forecasts that are out there should come down quite a bit as they get better and better and better. And of course, if they've got these voluntary incentive programs, they'll probably get quite a few people taking up those options rather than facing the law as well. So I think it's heading pretty well in the right direction. So that was pretty much our coverage there today, 53 minutes on the hour. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. It is pretty impressive what Trump is doing there, and it's going to save a lot of lives. Now, I wish we had that in New Zealand. I think that we don't have illegal immigration because we've got a big ocean around us, and we're at the bottom of the world, but we have legal immigration, and it's at record levels, and it's we've got a lot of very inferior cultures coming into our country. So we're hoping that we get some fixes up there. The same thing, ironically, is happening in Australia as well, because the reason why it's happening in both countries is because it's coordinated, right? It's coordinated with the United Nations and their replacement plan that they're running. So we get similar trends in the last 2 years, the same trends we're seeing in Australia. Yeah, we pretty much have the best country in the world, and we're in big decline. We've got a beautiful country, but socially it's going to be really in decline big time. So wish us luck down here. And hopefully the Trump effect will help lift all boats, right? Help lift all boats. We got Brennan in the house says, cheers, super. You're most welcome. Thanks very much, Brennan. I appreciate it. And I'll catch you guys on the next live stream. Take care, everybody. And bye for now. Cheers.